When we think of Sparta, we picture the ultimate military machine, a society engineered entirely for war, built on brute force, and completely hostile to anything resembling an intellectual life. Unlike Athens, the Spartans left behind almost no traditional cultural artifacts. They produced no great poetic epics, no theoretical literature, and no grand architecture. Their historical footprint consists entirely of weapons and armor. Yet, the greatest intellectual minds of ancient Greece and Rome were obsessed with Spartan culture. They saw something different hidden underneath that militaristic surface. To these ancient philosophers, Sparta was a living laboratory. It was a real-world experiment testing the absolute limits of human endurance and virtue. We are going to analyze primary texts from 3 distinct eras to test a specific historical hypothesis. Were the Spartans the first true Stoics? To answer that, we will evaluate Sparta through 3 specific philosophical lenses: the Socratic idealization, the Aristotelian critique, and the Roman Stoic application. This forces us to confront a difficult tension. Does extreme physical and emotional discipline automatically qualify you as a philosopher? Tracing how the ancients categorized Sparta reveals the foundational definitions of Hellenistic philosophy itself. We start with the Socratic Circle, which held a radically idealized view of Sparta, laid out in Plato's dialogue Protagoras. At the time, Athens had entire subcultures of Spartanizing citizens. They mimicked the superficial physical traits of Lacedaemonians, lacing on leather boxing gloves, exercising fanatically, and even getting their ears mangled in the fighting ring. Socrates argued that these imitators missed the point. He claimed that Sparta's military supremacy was a deliberate cover story, designed to hide their true advantage from the rest of the Greek world. That hidden advantage was a rigorous, tightly controlled education in philosophy and debate. We see this clearly in the concept of the laconic wit. Rather than simple brevity, it functioned as the ability to deliver highly calculated intellectual strikes. Socrates noted that an ordinary Spartan might feign simplicity in conversation, only to suddenly drop a perfectly aimed, deadly remark. The psychological effect of this precise verbal targeting leaves the intellectual opponent helpless, making them appear no better than a child. Plato expands on this psychological profile in the Charmides. Here he identifies hesychia, profound mental tranquility, as a defining characteristic of the Spartan mind. This tranquility is paired with eidos, a deep-seated modesty, integrity, and absolute self-control. Together, hesychia and eidos form a psychological architecture that prefigures the later Stoic ideal of internal control. To the Socratic Circle, Spartan physical endurance and military prowess were external byproducts of this underlying mental discipline. Plato's Circle viewed Spartan society as a collection of disguised philosopher kings. That Socratic romanticization fractured under the scrutiny of the next generation of thinkers. In his Eudemian Ethics and his political writings, Aristotle presents a devastating counterargument. He begins by examining the mechanics of the Spartan's civic character. Aristotle concedes a baseline point. Spartans were unparalleled masters at performing the physical actions required by virtue. However, he identifies a critical flaw in their system: telos, the intentionality behind the action. A noble person acts because virtue is splendid for its own sake. The Spartan motivation is utilitarian. They endure pain because it pays off in military dominance and civic control. He writes explicitly on this point. To the Laconian, whatever is useful is good, but it is not noble. This intentionality subordinates true philosophical virtue to state-sponsored, non-noble ends. The consequence of this flaw is severe. Spartans appear perfectly good when actively engaged in warfare, but they lack a functional moral compass during peacetime. Aristotle condemns them as appearing slavish when at peace and leisure. Without an external conflict to force their behavior, they are incapable of true philosophical flourishing. For Aristotle, mastering physical virtue is philosophically meaningless if the underlying motivation is political utility. To resolve the tension between Socratic idealization and Aristotelian critique, we look to the later Roman Stoics. The strict, uncompromising Stoic requirement demands that true virtue be driven by universal rationality, not regional civic conditioning. The Roman Stoics built their system around absolute volition, an unconquerable will, and oikeiosis, the affinity a human has for their own rational nature. We see how they evaluated Sparta in Seneca's Letter 77, which uses a historical anecdote of a young Spartan captive to test these Stoic concepts. In the account, the captive boy is ordered by his captors to perform a menial, servile task. He issues an absolute refusal. Rather than submit his personal freedom, the boy commits a final defiance, ending his life by dashing his head against a wall. The Roman Stoics did not view this as simple stubbornness. They saw it as the pinnacle of individual autonomy. The act proved that the Spartans' volition could not be forced into submission by external forces, physical pain, or the certainty of death. While Aristotle criticized Sparta's reliance on state utility, the Stoics looked at this unyielding internal freedom and found undeniable theoretical value. The Roman Stoics admired Spartan praxis and extreme willpower, even while acknowledging that their theoretical intentionality remained tied to the state. Bringing these three philosophical frameworks together allows us to finally answer the question, were the Spartans the best Stoics? The Spartans undeniably mastered the technology of Stoicism. They perfected physical endurance, achieved profound hesychia, and effectively subjugated their physical desires. However, their philosophical framework was tied to the utility of the state, rather than to a universal, rational human nature. Therefore, the historical record defines the Spartans as the ultimate proto-Stoics. They provided the raw, undeniable behavioral blueprint. They proved to the ancient world that extreme emotional and physical control was biologically possible. Later foundational figures of the Stoic school, philosophers like Zeno, Epictetus, and Seneca, extracted those specific behavioral traits from the Spartan example. They successfully elevated those traits, stripping away the localized military utility to engineer a universal philosophy designed for human flourishing. Sparta's enduring legacy lies in how their extreme society forced the ancient world to define the absolute boundaries of human virtue.